When Donald Trump first announced sweeping tariffs on Chinese goods in 2018, most people didn't see what was coming. They thought it was just another trade war, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of a seismic shift in global economics that would ripple through every major economy, industry, and supply chain. And now, with Trump back in office in 2025, the second wave is hitting even harder. We're not just watching tariffs get reinstated, we're watching a new era of economic nationalism unfold. Let's rewind. In 2018, Trump invoked Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 to impose tariffs of 25% on imported steel and 10% on aluminum. He cited national security concerns, but everyone knew the real target was China. Later that year, he escalated things by slapping 25% tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods, then raised the stakes by adding tariffs on another $200 billion. China hit back with retaliatory tariffs of its own, targeting key U.S. exports like soybeans, aircraft, and automobiles. The world's two biggest economies were locked in a tit-for-tat spiral. U.S. farmers were among the first to feel the pain. China stopped buying American soybeans, sending exports crashing from $24 billion in 2017 to just over $9 billion in 2018. Washington responded with subsidies, but the damage was done. Prices surged across a broad range of products, from washing machines to electronics. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated that the tariffs cost the average American household over $1,300 annually. But here's what most people missed. It wasn't just about the US and China. Companies worldwide began rethinking their reliance on Chinese factories. Apple, for example, started shifting manufacturing to India and Vietnam. Samsung increased its investment in Southeast Asia. A quiet exodus began. By 2024, China's share of US imports had dropped from 22% to under 13.5%. Vietnam, India, and Mexico picked up the slack. This wasn't deglobalization. It was reglobalization, just without China in the center. Fast forward to 2025. Trump is back in the White House, and he's doubling down. Within weeks of taking office, he announced a universal baseline tariff of 10% on all imports, with even steeper penalties for countries with trade surpluses against the US. The message? If you want access to the American market, you better play fair, or pay up. Markets reacted instantly. The S&P 500 dipped 5% in a week. The dollar strengthened temporarily, but investors started flocking to safe havens like gold, which surged past $3,000 per ounce for the first time in history. Currency volatility spiked. But Trump's tariff agenda doesn't exist in a vacuum. Around the world, other nations are reshaping their own trade policies. In response to US tariffs, the EU launched a defensive trade package in March 2025 targeting key American exports. China, now fully entrenched in its dual circulation strategy, is expanding its internal markets and strengthening ties with BRICS Plus nations. By Q1 2025, Chinese investments in Africa reached $60 billion. Trade deals with China, Russia, Iran, and Brazil are increasingly denominated in non-dollar currencies. The world is clearly fragmenting. We are witnessing what the IMF now calls geoeconomic fragmentation. According to their latest April 2025 report, this shift could reduce global GDP by up to 7% over the next decade. That's equivalent to wiping out the entire economic output of Germany. Even US allies are adjusting. Canada and Japan have begun creating their own domestic manufacturing incentives to avoid being caught in future trade crossfires. South Korea is pivoting toward a regional trade alliance with ASEAN nations to hedge against American and Chinese influence alike. Meanwhile, India has emerged as a preferred alternative for global investors seeking a neutral manufacturing hub. And supply chains, they're no longer just about cost, they're about resilience and control. The US, under Trump's renewed push, is aggressively rebuilding domestic manufacturing. The CHIPS Act is being expanded with an additional $150 billion in subsidies. Micron, Intel, and Global Foundries have already announced new fab expansions across Arizona, Texas, and New York. In total, over 70,000 semiconductor-related jobs are projected to be added by 2026. But it's not just chips. In March 2025, Trump issued an executive order mandating that at least 50% of all government-purchased medical equipment be sourced domestically by 2027. A similar push is underway for critical minerals used in EVs and defense tech. The Department of Energy has identified over 35 critical materials for which the US is heavily reliant on China. In response, the US is deepening ties with Canada, Australia, and even Chile to build a Western alternative to China's stranglehold on materials like rare earths, lithium, and cobalt. The US has also restarted talks with Greenland to explore mining partnerships in the Arctic, a clear signal of how strategic the mineral race has become. So, what does this mean for everyday people? Prices are rising. Again. Retailers like Walmart and Target have warned that the new tariffs will push consumer prices up by 3 to 5% this year. US automakers already under pressure from higher input costs and the EV transition are raising vehicle prices. The average price of a new car in the US has climbed to over $50,000 in early 2025. Energy bills are also being affected. With the shift away from Chinese solar panel imports and the drive to localize clean energy supply chains, renewable installation costs have increased by 12% year over year. This could slow down the energy transition, just as states ramp up electrification mandates. Meanwhile, small businesses, especially importers, are bearing the brunt. With less leverage and thinner margins, many are forced to either cut staff or raise prices. According to the National Federation of Independent Business, 41% of small business owners cited trade policy as their top concern in Q1 2025. But here's where it gets interesting. Some sectors are booming. US-based steel and aluminum producers are thriving under the renewed protectionist stance. Nucor and US Steel have posted back-to-back record quarters. Midwest manufacturing hubs, once considered rust belts, are experiencing a mini revival. In Ohio and Pennsylvania, factory job openings are at their highest levels in 15 years. And it's not just blue-collar jobs. With semiconductor and clean energy incentives flowing, white-collar engineering and technical jobs are surging in states like Arizona, Texas, and Colorado. The Silicon Heartland narrative is no longer just hype, it's becoming real. AI hardware firms, especially those in edge computing and embedded chip solutions, are seeing a wave of government contracts. But investors beware, this is a volatile world. In 2025, markets are moving fast on every policy tweet. One moment, Trump praises the Fed for holding rates steady. The next, he lashes out at the ECB for currency manipulation. Equity markets are more reactive than ever. Volatility indexes have remained above historical norms for most of the year. So, what should smart investors be watching? First, follow the capital flows. Money is moving out of China's focused ETFs and into emerging markets like India, Indonesia, and Mexico. BlackRock's iShares India ETF ticker symbol INDA is up 18% year to date, while FXI, the China large cap ETF, is flat. Second, commodities. Gold, silver, and industrial metals are gaining ground as trade tensions and supply reshoring reshape global production. Lithium and copper are especially hot as EV demand collides with supply uncertainty. Third, domestic infrastructure. Companies like Caterpillar, Vulcan Materials, and Eaton are set to benefit from billions in government-led infrastructure spending and domestic manufacturing booms. Fourth, the defense sector. With rising geopolitical tensions, the defense sector is once again in focus. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman are seeing renewed interest as global military budgets expand in response to trade uncertainty and regional rivalries. Finally, currency hedging. As more countries shift away from the US dollar, FX risk is becoming a major factor in portfolio construction. The IMF reported that dollar reserves fell to 57% of global central bank holdings, the lowest in 25 years. Let's not forget energy. As of April 2025, oil prices have declined to approximately $65 per barrel, influenced by increased OPEC Plus production, easing supply constraints, and concerns over global economic growth dampening demand. Meanwhile, natural gas prices have stabilized after last year's volatility, but the US is exporting record LNG volumes to Europe and Asia. Domestic energy plays like Chevron and EQT are gaining institutional attention. So where does all of this leave us? We're entering a new economic order, less interconnected, more regional, and deeply politicized. Tariffs are no longer just tools, they're weapons in a broader fight for economic dominance. Trump's return has reignited the nationalist economic playbook, and whether you agree with it or not, one thing is clear. The world we knew pre-2018 is not coming back. Globalization as we knew it is being rewritten. The question isn't whether tariffs are good or bad, it's who will adapt the fastest. Will companies shift production smartly? Will investors rotate toward the right sectors? Will countries diversify their trade partners in time? Because if there's one thing Trump has shown, love him or hate him, it's that he doesn't just change policy. He changes the game. And in this new world order, adapting early isn't just an advantage, it's survival.